Welcome Joshua Collins to PoliticOly, a weekly news and politics talk show based in Olympia, Washington. If you're just tuning in for the interview, check out the links in the description below for more candidate interviews and more. You can find me on Twitter at OlyPolitic for show updates and at Oli Stewart for my main. I do a weekly show every Sunday at 1, and I'm always looking for contributors and collaborators in the Pacific Northwest. It's July 6th, 2020, and primary election ballots go out in 9 days. Joshua Collins here is running for U.S. House of Representatives for Congressional District 10. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Josh. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running to represent the 10th.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Stuart. So I'm Joshua Collins. I'm 26 years old. I'm a truck driver. I'm also autistic, and I'm running for Congress because I want to get representation for the working class in Congress. Most of Congress, as you know, is lawyers or big-time CEOs, and less than 2% of them are from any sort of blue-collar backgrounds. Most of the people in Congress are also funded by corporations and are generally funded by the very wealthy. I myself, I believe very strongly in running campaigns on the donations of small donations from working class people. I am, pushing for Medicare for all at the minimum, at best a national healthcare service similar to more like the UK system. I also believe in, taking profit out of the pharmaceutical industry. I support a Green New Deal that transitions our economy to green energy by 2025, and I also want to see an end to the wars, a living wage, and an end to homelessness nationally. So just some basic stuff about me.
Awesome. A while back, you decided to stop running as a Democrat, and you announced that you'd run as an Essential Workers Party candidate. Talk about what led up to that. And when I look at the EWP webpage, it doesn't have much on there yet. And so basically my question is, why not either independent or say one of the other established parties, Socialist Alternative or, Green or something like that?
Yeah, so the Essential Workers Party is meant to be a coalition party that basically hinges on the success of this election. We tested ballot lines of existing parties that I'm a member of. If you don't know, I'm a member of Socialist Alternative and the Green Party of Washington. I tried to see if we could run basically anything other than Democrat that would be better than running as a Democrat. And as far as ballot lines, Essential Workers Party was very well received by the average voter. So that was the rationale behind it. Now, of course, you can see the logic in it. Essential workers are very heavily lionized right now by the media. Although, as a party, as a ballot line, the impact of it is going to be more than just, applauses at midnight or at 7 p.m. for essential workers. We are fighting for hazard pay for all essential workers, for, healthcare for all workers, and also for the unemployed people. We also believe that they deserve, unemployment perpetually, not just the amount of time that Congress has currently, allowed us to have the additional unemployment. And I think during a pandemic, you should make sure that all people are taken care of, and not, just take care of lobbyists and large corporations. So.
Oh, yeah, that's very interesting. So basically, if you are successful in getting through the primary, of course, getting elected in the general ideally, but even just winning, getting into the general,
yeah,
that would basically be a point where you could reach out to people and to continue to build that as a coalition.
Yeah, and we already have reached out to, the memberships of several different parties and organizations. We have, I guess, the sideline support of, various organizations, but largely it's, what I'm trying to do is very similar to what was done with, of all comparisons, Brexit. A lot of people remember what happened with the Brexit Party. It was a party named after something that was a popular term, right? Now, obviously, this is a right-wing movement, and very different from what I'm doing. But they formed a very successful political party over the course of a couple months, just by choosing something that was a good ballot line and that conveyed a message with the actual line on the ballot, right? When you see Essential Workers Party, you know what it stands for, just like you would know what Brexit Party stands for. And there's also history of this working in the United States past, before, particularly with the Free Soil Party. Now, the Free Soil Party was a party that was formed off of a single issue, and they became such a threat to the Republican Party that the Republican Party adopted their entire platform and absorbed their entire infrastructure. And that led to the abolition of slavery in America, at least outside of prisons. So this is kind of similar to that in that, it just conveys, what it stands for and at least piques the interest of the average American. And, hopefully if it works, along with our, months and months of campaigning and hundreds of thousands of phone calls, we can get through this and build a coalition party that actually is a threat to the existing two-party system.
That's a very interesting concept, and hopefully I'll follow up with you on that in the future, and we'll see how it goes. So I guess a quick follow-up on that is about another coalition. Do you want to tell folks about what is the Rose Caucus?
Well, the Rose Caucus is something extremely different from the Essential Workers Party. Now, the Rose Caucus is not a party. It's not. It's not really a PAC. I think now it's officially a nonprofit. But what it exists to do is to set a party line. Now, before the Rose Caucus existed, there wasn't really any standard for whether or not a politician is lined with the vast majority of left ideas. There were organizations, and a lot of them have, on the local level in particular, a lot of leeway to endorse more moderate candidates. Now, the Rose Caucus is very hardline. It only endorses people who explicitly identify as socialists publicly, people who were required to endorse Bernie Sanders, and align with its policies, which there's over 200 of them, from a trans rights platform to a Black Lives Matter policy platform, to a very anti-imperialist agenda, and much more. So, and that's what the Rose Caucus was formed off of. And so far we've gotten, I think, 2 candidates through primaries, one of them of which is Angelica Dueñas in California. And so she's got a really good chance of winning her general election just because of the conditions of her race. And so we might get at least one candidate through. And we have a lot of primaries still to come. So we'll see how that goes. I'm the second truck driver running in Rose Caucus. One of our truck driver Rose Caucus candidates did lose, but they got over 30% of the vote in their primary. So so we've been doing very well with little money, and especially for our first cycle.
That's great. And just a quick note for viewers, I've done 2 other interviews with Explicit Socialists that are running in Washington State so far in 2020, and that's Mary Ellen Biggerstaff and Johnny Mead, who are running for position 1 and 2 of the Washington State House of Representatives. I'll put links to that and to the Rose Caucus as well in the description. So moving on, I saw the statement from a while back from the Washington high school Democrats about how they were forced against their will by the national high school Dems to rescind their endorsement of you. Mm-hmm. And just as a side note, I asked my followers for questions they'd like to ask you today. And one response was from Mario Felipe Bayamonte, who's the chair of Washington High School Democrats. And they just wanted to say thank you. From my perspective as a millennial, it seems clear that the Democratic Party has decided they're willing to completely lose millennials and Gen Z in order to maintain the oligarchy as long as they can. Just my opinion. So as a campaign that attracts a lot of young people, though, what's your take on that? Yeah,
I mean, my experience in the Democratic Party, particularly in Washington, well, I only really have experience in Washington State Dem Party politics, but I went to, over 100 different meetings for the Democratic Party, between LD meetings, county LDs, the statewide meetings, and I saw almost no young people. Almost every single meeting I went to, I was the youngest person. At one of the meetings, there were two young people. They already knew of me and supported me. And one of them was an organizer for our campaign. So it was very rare that I saw people my age in these meetings. Aside from maybe a couple in the Thurston County meetings, right? But generally, it's a very older crowd, very much older crowd. A lot of retired folks, a lot of people who also come from like the upper middle class backgrounds. And I think that is a big problem with the Democratic Party. They, despite me being in their spaces, theoretically aligning with them on policy, doing everything I could to listen to their concerns and questions and make sure that it was super clear to them who I was still treated like an outsider by every single part of the Democratic Party. I was running as a Democrat. By all standards, I should be considered a real Democrat, but I wasn't. It was a mixture of me being very young, but also me being just a regular working class person and not a sitting politician, right? The comparison to how I was treated within the Democratic Party to some of my opponents who are now running still as Democrats, it's just night and day. And I think this is a problem that goes very deep with the Democratic Party. It's very gatekeepy. They have no interest in bringing in young people. I really did try to bring young people into the Democratic Party, and I had conversations with leadership within the Dem Party in Washington State, all over different LTs, and frankly, none of them were willing to meet me on some of the issues that I thought were important, that young people in general thought were important. They would only do lip service on issues like, for example, like trans issues. They would do lip service and talk about how they care about trans lives, and they would commemorate trans people who died that make national news, but they wouldn't require that Democratic candidates and Democratic politicians support policies that improve the lives of trans people or make trans people safer. So that was kind of the recurring theme with them, with every issue. I don't think the Democratic Party is generally interested in appealing to young people. I think they're not interested in appealing to the regular working class. I think they're only interested in appealing to the MSNBC, like super committed to the party types, and pretty much no one else. I don't think they're interested in building a base and building on top of what they already have, which I think is what's leading to the decline, both locally on a state level and nationally of the Democratic Party. Is just they're not interested. They don't care about people who aren't already super deep into party politics.
My experience in the local Democratic Party is fairly similar, which I am also not at all a part of anymore.
Yeah.
So moving on, looking at the public disclosure records in Washington CD10 race, it looks like the Democrats in the race have raised a lot of big donor money, and they haven't spent much at all. And they've saved most of it. Perhaps they're confident in winning the primary, so they're saving money for the general election. I can only speculate. On the other hand, you've raised a similar amount of money, but it's mostly small donations, and you've spent most of it on your campaign already.
Yeah.
In fact, they've raised a little bit more money overall, but you've raised more than 3 times as much as any of them in small donations.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the difference in strategy here?
Well, this is pretty common if you're progressive challenging incumbents. You're going to get more individual donations if you're doing well. But generally, they're going to get just a small number of large donations, and they're going to have more than you. Initially, the incumbent, Denny Heck, had, I think it was $1.5 million, almost entirely in large donations. And that was quite a hurdle to jump over, in itself. The fact that we have 3 opponents who don't have as much as him combined means that there is a larger chance that we could get through this primary than there was with him, not including the factor that there are 19 candidates, which is one of the most crowded primaries in recent history in Washington State. But I think that as far as spending goes, I mean, they have the same strategy that every Democrat has ever had. It's, use your money, try to, buy as much television ads and radio ads, and possibly some Google and Facebook ads as well, as you can afford, and hope that gets you through your primary. And that's what their position is, right? Obviously, there's no paid canvassers. I do know that some of them had paid phone bankers, but yeah, their strategy is to try and do the money war. More yard signs, more more ads. They don't actually have big phone banking operations, so at least as far as I know, I do know that they phone bank the Democratic Party, but I don't know how much they've called outside of that. So we'll see how much effort they're actually put into voter contact. But I know that is what all of our effort is going into. We are working in directly contacting voters through phone banking, through mailers. And when I say mailers, we're sending out a letter rather than, one of those Domino's coupon type letters or mailers, I guess. So, and we did a lot of canvassing before the pandemic did shut down. So, we'll see the effectiveness of, what kind of campaigns they're running, and never know what's going to happen. So.
Yeah. In your disability, or rather in your justice reform platform, we'll go to the disability question next. In your justice reform platform, you talk about prosecuting human rights violators. And I'm curious what jurisdiction would try these cases in your view? And also, are we just talking law enforcement, or would you include joining the International Criminal Court and subjecting Americans to international prosecution?
Well, yeah, I think we should abide by the agreements we're supposed to be involved in. The United Nations has international laws that we're supposed to agree to, and I do think that human rights violations should be prosecuted. I don't think we should be an exception to it, and I think most people aren't aware of the fact that it's pretty much only African nations that are held to these standards. We theoretically are supposed to be held to these standards, but we have something called the Hague Invasion Act, which means we will literally invade The Hague, which is where the International Criminal Court is, if an American is being tried there. I don't think that makes any sense. I think that we should hold, our own country accountable to the same standards that other countries are supposed to be held to. And I don't think that, we should be allowing, our government in particular to be violating human rights. I think that those just basic rights of people should be enforced both here and around the world. So generally I would just support the what the Hague is supposed to be for, what International Criminal Court is supposed to be for.
Thank you for that. And it sounds so common sense, right? But it's, good luck finding other candidates who will make such a declaration, right? Yeah. So anyway, I want to move on to a couple of questions that go together that I got from other folks that were passing along questions for you. Mm-hmm. So Ara Morgenstern writes on Facebook, quote, "I would love more info on intersectional justice for disabled folks. So how racial discrimination affects disability discrimination, because medical textbooks are written for white bodies and have racist divisions written in. I'm also interested to hear how much he knows about the disability justice movement and Sins Invalid," end quote. And one from @HeyDusty on Twitter, quote, "I'm looking at Joshua's disability platform. What are your thoughts specifically on the current income and resource limits for people with SSI being so ridiculously low? Is that a problem that can be solved with pay equity or the Time Act? The Time Act, the IDEA, and pay equity all sound good, but the way SSI exists, some disabled folks wouldn't qualify for Medicaid, which currently provides in-home long-term care. How would you structure those changes to best serve everyone?"
Yeah, I think we need to increase, massively expand, basically all of Social Security and disability. you know, whether you're, you know, on actual Social Security and you're just retired, or if you have a disability, like the payments are not enough to live off of in pretty much any city in the country. So, and I also think it's ridiculous the way that your disability payments are determined. You know, if you are someone who didn't have parents who worked, then you pretty much don't qualify for almost anything. And just the way our benefits are determined in itself is problematic, but also just the caps on how much you can qualify for are just just way too low. And I think we should make sure that the standard is something that people can live off of. But I also think that should come with things that guarantee other parts of our other necessities as a right, which means housing and healthcare, you know, should be guaranteed as a right, and you shouldn't have to be, you know, trying to pay for your housing out of your disability payments. We should make sure that we have public housing that is actually accessible to people, that people can just live in if they're on disability, and we shouldn't need to have someone trying to pay $1,800 in rent off of a disability payment that's $800 a month. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You propose declaring missing and murdered Indigenous women as a national emergency and acting to prevent the problem from escalating. First of all, thank you for speaking on this issue. And second, what are some policies or actions that could help us accomplish that?
Well, when it comes to the missing and murdered Indigenous women, you know, I think that this is, it's not something that's entirely caused by this, but part of the problem with it is that the federal government does not trust the tribes with a lot of the data that they receive, and doesn't allow them access to just general information and investigations that they're, you know, taking on, I guess, which means the tribes don't often know when someone has been found, and the most difficult part of them trying to find someone who's missing is that the federal government doesn't tell them if they found them or if they found clues or general progress in those investigations. So it's, I think one important thing is to open up the communication between the federal government and the tribes, and make sure the federal government is actually sharing data and information with the tribes, especially when it comes to this issue, because it is an epidemic and it's really, you know, it seems pretty obvious both, you know, in the US and in Canada, that our federal governments could help mitigate the issues. Now, as far as, you know, the laws, you know, governing like murder on tribal land, I do think that can vary from state to state, and that's some stuff that we should take a look at, making it so that, you know, you can actually be prosecuted if you kill someone on tribal land. So I think that that's an issue, more of our system of prosecution, and that would require some changes to the like definitions of murder and stuff like that. So, but yeah, as far as like declaring an emergency, what that would do is provide the funding to actually address the issue, and, you know, put more resources into it. And I think, you know, what that means is getting resources to the tribes, so they can, you know, be well equipped to, you know, investigate and look for people who go missing, and, you know, try and catch people who are doing things that, you know, because a lot of it's also tied to like trafficking, and so these are things that, you know, can be addressed systemically, and it just requires, you know, better enforcement of the existing laws and investigations. So.
Yeah, and appreciating the urgency of the situation. Yeah. So on the one hand, you propose some reparations for property seized through civil asset forfeiture in the discriminatory legal system.
Yeah.
But I noticed you call for more civil asset forfeiture in a different area. You propose using it to seize the assets of companies doing union busting and give the assets to the workers.
Yeah.
I think that's a great example of how your platform isn't about small reforms, but a transformative change in values from capitalist government to a socialist one.
Yeah.
Can you talk about your overall vision for moving from capitalism to socialism?
Yeah. So when I get asked, like, what does it mean to be a socialist? For me, It just means that I believe that the working class should own and control the government and the economy. Now, under our current conditions, our government and economy are owned and controlled almost entirely by the non-working class, the capitalist class. Now, these people are people who are generally inheriting their wealth, inheriting ownership, and largely are gaining their wealth through the exploitation of workers. I believe that we need a truly democratic society, which means we not only need to fix and root out corruption of our actual governmental democratic system, but we also need to change ownership and control of our workplaces. The fact that, we only view democracy as something that applies to, who we pick as president, I think is fundamentally flawed. I think it should also apply to, whether or not your job is going to, shut down operations and move to another country, right? It should also apply to whether or not you skip out on safety equipment, right? There are a lot of things in our workplaces that I don't think we should leave up to, what is most profitable. And that's why I believe that workers, not, arbitrary owners, should be in control of their workplaces. Now, I mostly prefer a worker co-op system in parts of our society where it makes sense. A good example would be the trucking industry. Truckers who are owner-operators, they tend to have better wages, better working conditions in general than workers who are working either non-union or union jobs from a company. Now, the other form of like workers being able to control their workplace is a democratically controlled but like community-owned workplace. Now, this would be something like a hospital. I don't think hospitals should be owned by a for-profit company. I think they should be owned by the community. And then those workers in the hospital should be government employees who are guaranteed a democratic system in their workplace so they can decide what is best for the patients rather than having just some board of a company decide what's best for patients.
Thank you. Let's talk campaign update. How are you doing? What have you been up to? What do you have coming up? And how can people plug in if they want to help out and get involved?
So we've been doing a lot of phone banking. I mean, that's been one of our biggest focuses. If you'd like to help with it, you can just sign up at joshua2020.com. We'll also have some larger public phone banking events coming up. So if you haven't phone banked, but you want to help, in our last stretch of this campaign, look at our Facebook page tomorrow. There should be some events for our upcoming phone banking, but we also do have phone banking shifts almost every single day, sometimes several shifts a day. So if you want to help phone bank, all you have to do is just sign up to volunteer, and you'll get a message asking you like what times you can help. But also, if you live in Olympia or in the greater Pierce County area, just tell your friends and family to vote for me. That's usually the most effective way to convince a voter, is by having their friend or family member tell them who to vote for. And you can always send them to my website, and you can give them my email to ask questions. So my campaign email is joshua@joshua2020.com. So if you do have questions, or if your family member has questions, they can always just shoot me an email right there, and I'll respond to it myself.
Awesome, and I'll post all those links in the description. I encourage people watching to follow those links also, because you want to read through Joshua's platform. There's way too many issues for us all to talk about in one interview. Hopefully we can do another interview and we can talk about some more of these things. Joshua has called for abolishing the CIA, so we could do a whole interview on that. But no, there's so much, and we haven't gotten to Black Lives Matter, on climate change, and so many things. So, and I have a couple more questions, but yeah, go check out the rest of his platform, because there's a lot of great ideas on there. And you already had a Black Lives Matter platform before this whole recent protest movement started, right? And so update us, though, on recent developments from your perspective and what your involvement with the movement recently has been.
Yeah. So what I am, if you look at my policy platform, you'll find my federal policies. Now, federal policy is very different from what is most needed for police change, I guess. I don't know what to call it. I support defunding the police. Now, when I say this, a lot of people who are less involved in politics don't really know what it means. Defunding the police means taking the money that is spent on police to solve a lot of issues that frankly shouldn't be solved by police, and using the actual type of worker who is, should be the thing to solve them. Now, there are a lot of problems that we see on the local level that the police are used to try to address, and like, statistically, just like if you're just looking at just the actual facts of like how it actually works out, police are not good at addressing a lot of things aside from, like an active shooter type situation. I mean, when you talk about like, homelessness is probably the most perfect example is homelessness. You can't solve homelessness with cops. Like, it sounds ridiculous, right? But that's actually what almost every local government in this country does, is instead of housing the homeless and just guaranteeing that homeless people will be given housing, they use police to, constantly monitor them, and to then, when they do have a camp, and business owners in the area complain, the police come in, they take everyone's stuff and they throw it away, and arrest people who don't leave. And theoretically they're supposed to find them housing, but they generally don't. And it ends up just making these people who had almost nothing have even less. And now you have just more desperate homeless people. What we should do instead, like if we're looking for the actual solution to that issue, we should have mental health care for the homeless and also housing for the homeless. Now that would address the issue much more effectively, and actually more fiscally responsibly than using cops to address that issue. And this is kind of the same thing we do with everything. We choose cops as the attempted solution for almost everything. If someone's having a mental health crisis, they send the cops. If when they really should be sending a social worker or a medic, they use cops for these issues. And I think that when you explain it this way, that we'd like to stop using cops as the thing to solve every single issue in society, I think people generally agree with that. And even better, it also will likely save your city, your local government money. And I do think that the federal government could have a role in that. And that means just providing, guidelines and different ways to, actually solve these problems. And I think that is going to require someone who actually is interested in solving them and not giving away, contracts to their friends or something. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then of course, just also besides law enforcement reform, like, just having in mind a Black Lives Matter informed perspective applying to all these different other areas of policy, from health policy to foreign policy to everything else. So one other note on your platform, you've got a great environmental platform. Your Green New Deal plank is one of the best around. And so, but we all know our country is being indefensibly stubborn in its refusal to take the climate crisis seriously. What's your strategy for enabling the necessary paradigm shift and getting us on track for survival?
I think it's going to require a serious threat to the Democratic Party that isn't the Republicans. The Democrats are okay losing to the Republican Party. They're okay if the Republican Party becomes the larger power of the two. What they're most afraid of, though, is a third party becoming a serious threat to them. Now, what I think that looks like is having someone in Congress who is not a member of those two parties, but is also a member of the existing, threat that needs to be a progressive third party, pro-working class, intersectional party. And I think the only way we can succeed with that, is by having a coalition. I think that, we have a lot of really successful local parties on, a smaller level. I think if we could build a coalition that is nationwide, that actually, can start running candidates in every, all over the country on a ballot line that is, saleable to the average person. I think that's what it will take to defeat to actually stop the Democrats from doing what they're doing. Now, if you want to see like how this has been done in the United States in particular, you can look at Shama Sawant and Socialist Alternative and what they've done with Seattle. Now they took some very popular issues, ran an election under the Socialist Alternative banner, and they largely won on multiple workers' issues, but primarily on the $15 minimum wage. And that built a movement that was able to threaten the Democratic Party from the outside, and ended up shifting the Democratic Party within Seattle pretty far left. Now, that's what I would like to do on a national level. And I think the way we do that is with the Essential Workers Party ballot line and with a coalition under that banner. So we'll see if that works. But my job, if elected, will not be to make friends with Nancy Pelosi. It will be to basically fight with Nancy Pelosi and draw the contrast between her and me, and also make clear to the person who is, thinks that everyone on the left is, crazy, to make the rational case for them, like to explain things like defund the police, so that the average person who maybe didn't agree with me already will then agree with me, and do that with essentially every issue. And I think, being a truck driver doesn't hurt. I think people will be more likely to hear my ideas than if I were coming from, a career in politics or something. And I think the way I, speak pretty frankly, and I don't use a lot of big words, I think that probably also helps. But yeah, I want to make the case to the non-voters. And also I want to get working class Republicans to stop voting Republican. And I think the way we do that is not with, it's not with being corrupt and being more corporate. It's by actually, doing class politics and representing the worker. So that's my hope. That's my vision of how we actually, push the Democratic Party. I don't think we can do it from within, unless we get another AOC in. I don't know how much more effective that would be. I think that, we certainly need an external effort from against the Democratic Party that is actually successful and, gets them to be afraid of us at the very least.
Yeah, completely agree. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show, Josh. And it's been actually a really great interview. I hope folks tune in, and I hope we can follow up in the future after the successful primary run, right? So,
Yeah,
thank you for running, and best of luck to you. I just want to make a couple of quick notes for the audience here, because I'm going to go ahead and post this tonight instead of waiting till Sunday, till my show. So I hope folks tune in on Sunday. I post my show around 1 o'clock. But yeah, a couple quick notes here. There's 2 upcoming events here in Olympia. On the 7th, there is Black Liberation March Against Displacement, rally downtown at Percival Landing at 6 o'clock. And then on the 10th, July 10th, there's a rally in Lacey that I'll post a link in the description for as well. And there's also a court support event for Justice for Yvonne McDonald on the 10th as well. So I'll post a link to those upcoming events. And yeah, thanks for joining me, and I hope to catch up to you again soon.
Thanks.